You guys today, Dijonai Carrington, after clotheslining Sophie Cunningham, running into the locker room, screaming, "That's white privilege!" Then tweeting 8/23, threatening Sophie Cunningham and the Indiana Fever. Dijonai Carrington now comes out and clarifies what she means when she says white privilege for the Indiana Fever.
2 minutes into the first quarter, and Sophie Cunningham was flying. She had a clear lane on the fast break, the kind of moment where a player's about to put up an easy bucket and extend their team's lead. The ball was in her hands, the basket was waiting, and for a split second, it looked like the simplest play in basketball was about to unfold. The geometry was perfect. The spacing was right. She had a step on her defender, and there was nothing between her and 2 points except the rim itself.
So with 2 minutes left in the first quarter, Dijonai Carrington just slapped the dog shit out of Sophie Cunningham. Sophie pops up, she's obviously upset. Dijonai says, "Try me." And then look at Stephanie White. Look at her face. Look. She's mad as shit. Now, number one, this is obviously a flagrant 2. It just is. By the letter of the law, you gotta call a flagrant 2. We all know.
Then everything changed in an instant that would define the rest of this game and spark a controversy that would echo throughout the entire league for weeks to come. Coming from behind, moving at full speed, Dijonai Carrington made a choice. Instead of contesting the shot, instead of trying to get a hand on the ball, instead of doing any of the things a defender is supposed to do, she extended her forearm straight across Cunningham's face and neck. The contact was immediate and brutal. Not a glancing blow. Not something that could be explained away as incidental. This was a full, deliberate impact across the upper body of someone who was completely vulnerable in the air. Cunningham's body went backward, her momentum completely disrupted, her balance lost in an instant. She crashed to the floor hard, the impact sending a jolt through her entire frame. What's wild is that the ball still went in. The shot had so much arc, so much precision in the release, that even with Carrington's forearm connecting flush with her face and neck, even with the disruption of her movement, the bucket still counted. The ball went through the net like nothing had happened. Like no one had just been taken out. Like the game was just going on normally. But nobody was talking about the bucket after that moment. Nobody cared about the 2 points on the scoreboard. Everyone in the arena was focused on what had just happened in slow motion right in front of them. The arena went quiet. Not the kind of quiet where fans are holding their breath during a crucial moment, but the kind of quiet where something shocking just happened and everyone's processing what they saw. Players stopped moving. The normal flow of the game just froze. Cunningham lay on the court for a second before getting up, and when she did, the anger was written all over her face. This wasn't just a hard foul in a competitive game. This wasn't a play that could be written off as just 2 players battling for position. This looked like something intentional, something personal, something that went beyond basketball. She immediately got right into Carrington's space, her jaw clenched, her eyes locked with an intensity that said everything about what she was feeling in that moment. Her teammates had to separate them. Officials had to get involved immediately just to pull the 2 players apart and prevent this from escalating into a physical confrontation right there on the court. The message was unmistakable. Cunningham knew exactly what just happened, and she wasn't going to let it slide without a response.
Sophie Cunningham, otherwise known as MAGA Barbie in the WNBA, is a superstar player. She's one of the most famous female athletes in the world because she stood up for women in women's sports, saying only biological women should be allowed to play in the WNBA. And for that, she is literally risking her life. Check this out. This is what happened to Sophie Cunningham last night when she was clotheslined by a filthy, dirty player for Chicago who has a name that I can't pronounce, or maybe I just refuse to do that. That's my right as an American. But this is a player that has attacked Caitlin Clark, gouged her eye out, that has now bloodied the face of Sophie Cunningham, and as soon as she did this, she tweeted white privilege, meaning she's declaring this is a race crime. Now, if a white woman was doing this to black women, it'd be the #1 story in the world, she'd be banned from the league forever. But somehow black women are allowed to get away with this against white women. And it's white women in the league who make themselves a target by simply standing up for traditional values and common sense.
She wasn't going to pretend it was just part of the game. She wasn't going to shake it off. She was going to let everyone know exactly how she felt about what had just been done to her. Now here's where the refs had to make a decision that would ultimately set off everything that came next. They didn't just call a regular foul and move on. They went straight to the monitor. They reviewed the contact frame by frame, analyzed the impact from multiple angles, looked at how Cunningham landed, and what the full scope of what happened on the court actually was. And within minutes, they upgraded the call. What started as a regular foul, what might have been a flagrant one in some circumstances, became a flagrant 2. Under WNBA rules, a flagrant 2 is an automatic ejection. No debate, no second chances. You're done, game over, you've got to go. But the flagrant 2 isn't just some arbitrary call that refs pull out of thin air when they're feeling strict or when they want to make a statement. There's actually a specific checklist that officials go through. Does the player wind up before making contact? Check. Is there excessive impact that goes beyond what's necessary? Check. Does the follow-through extend beyond what's required to contest a shot? Check. Is the other player in a vulnerable position, unable to protect themselves or get away from the incoming contact? Absolutely check. Cunningham was in the air, committed to her layup attempt, completely exposed and unable to do anything about what was coming at her. Carrington came from behind with a closed fist, connecting with the upper body and face area with force that sent Cunningham flying. When you go through that checklist, when you analyze every single element of what a flagrant 2 is supposed to be, this play checked every single box. It was a textbook flagrant 2. It was the kind of play that officials don't need to huddle over or debate or second-guess themselves about. The rules were clear. The violation was obvious. The punishment was mandatory. The officials didn't need to consider who threw the foul or who received it. They just needed to apply the rules the way they're supposed to be applied in professional basketball. What made this moment even more significant was something the officiating crew chief said afterward when reporters started asking questions about the sequence. When reporters asked why Cunningham wasn't penalized for her heated response to getting hit, why she didn't face consequences for getting in Carrington's face, the crew chief basically said her reaction was completely justified given the severity of the contact. In other words, the officials themselves were confirming that what happened to her was serious enough, excessive enough, and dangerous enough that getting angry about it was the natural human response. They were essentially saying, yeah, that hit was bad. She had every right to be upset about it. We understand her reaction completely. Think about what that tells you. The people whose entire job is knowing the rules inside and out, whose entire career is built on making objective, consistent calls, they were saying that the contact was so severe that the natural reaction, shock, anger, frustration, was not only understandable but justified. They weren't penalizing her for showing emotion. They weren't treating her reaction as unsportsmanlike. They were treating it as the reasonable, expected response to being hit hard in the face. Let's rewind the tape and look at what happened in those crucial moments right after the whistle blew, and the refs made the call that would change everything. Cunningham hit the floor hard, and the impact of that forearm to her face was absolutely undeniable to everyone watching. You could see her wince. You could see her processing what just happened. You could see the moment she realized that she'd been taken out on a play that had nothing to do with actually defending against her shot. Then she got up, and her face told the entire story without her saying a single word. This wasn't frustration with a tough call. This wasn't just competitive heat in the moment. This was genuine anger mixed with shock. The kind of emotion that comes from realizing someone just deliberately targeted you. She immediately moved toward Carrington, getting right into her space with purpose, and her body language was unmistakable to everyone in that arena. She wanted answers. She wanted to know why someone would take her out like that on a play that had nothing to do with basketball anymore. She wanted Carrington to see her face, to see her reaction, to understand that what had just happened was not okay. The officials had to step in immediately because they could sense the tension, the potential for this to escalate into something worse, something that could result in a bigger confrontation right there in front of thousands of fans. Teammates from both sides rushed over to make sure the situation didn't spiral into a full physical altercation on the court. There were bodies between them within seconds. Players were positioning themselves, trying to create space, trying to prevent this from turning into something that would result in multiple ejections. The game had to be paused, the momentum had to be stopped, and everyone involved had to take a breath and step back. But the damage was already done. The message had already been sent loud and clear. And every single person in that arena knew that this was going to be reviewed, that this was going to be upgraded, and that Carrington was going to be ejected from the game. What's crucial to understand here is what happened during the review process, because this is where the integrity of the game is supposed to shine through. The officials weren't just making a quick decision based on what they saw in real time. They went through the footage methodically, frame by frame, examining every single angle of the contact. They looked at the approach. They looked at the point of impact. They looked at how Cunningham fell. They looked at everything from multiple perspectives, trying to understand the full scope of what had happened. And once they saw it from all those different angles, once they understood the severity of what had actually transpired, they made their call without hesitation. Flagrant 2, automatic ejection. But here's the thing that people often overlook when they're talking about this moment. When the crew chief was asked about Cunningham's reaction afterward, about why she wasn't also penalized for getting heated with Carrington, for stepping into her space, for showing her emotions, the official's response was absolutely telling. The crew chief said her reaction was deemed acceptable given the circumstances. In other words, they were saying that what Cunningham did, getting upset, showing anger, stepping up to Carrington, was reasonable. Her anger was warranted. Getting upset after taking a shot like that to the face wasn't something that deserved punishment. It was something that deserved understanding and acceptance. Think about what that tells you about how serious the officials thought the foul was. They were essentially saying, yes, what happened to this player was bad enough that we understand and accept why she's angry about it. They weren't saying she played dirty. They weren't saying she provoked it or escalated it. They were saying that the foul was so severe, so clearly outside the rules, that the natural reaction to it, shock, anger, frustration, stepping up to the person who hit you, was completely acceptable in their eyes. That's a powerful statement from people whose job is to stay neutral and objective. So Cunningham's still standing there, adrenaline rushing through her body, her heart pounding, probably still feeling the impact of that hit across her face and neck. She's got a crowd behind her, supporting her, understanding what just happened. She's got teammates checking on her, making sure she's okay, asking if she needs medical attention. She's got coaches looking at her to make sure she's all right and ready to get back in the game or sit out if she needs to. And she's got the referees confirming with their own words and their own actions that what just happened to her was serious. It was bad. It was wrong. And she had every reason to be upset about it. Meanwhile, Carrington knew what was coming. She'd been through the review process before. She'd seen other players get ejected for similar fouls throughout her career. She knew the rules inside and out. And as soon as that crew chief made the final call, as soon as that finger pointed toward the locker room, she knew she was done for the day. She had to leave the court, head to the locker room, and figure out how to process what had just happened in front of thousands of fans in the arena and millions of people watching on television and streaming online. And here's where it gets strange. Instead of taking a moment to cool down, instead of sitting with what she'd done and thinking through how to approach the situation, instead of maybe even composing an apology or at least an explanation for later, Carrington went straight to her phone. She was in the locker room now, away from the game, away from her teammates, away from the pressure of the moment. But instead of letting things settle down, instead of taking time to think, she decided the internet needed to hear from her right then. Right there. Seconds after being ejected. Seconds after the review had confirmed that she'd committed a flagrant 2. Seconds after Cunningham was standing on the court with blood on her face from the impact of her forearm. She opened Threads. She typed out 2 words, white privilege. She tagged the Indiana Fever directly underneath it, and she hit post. No elaboration, no context, no follow-up message explaining what she meant or what she was referring to, just those 2 words hanging out there for the entire world to interpret however they wanted. And within minutes, every sports media outlet, every analyst on television, every fan on social media was asking the same questions. What did she just say? What was she implying? And more importantly, what did she think she was doing by making this about race when the play itself had absolutely nothing to do with anything except bad sportsmanship and a rule violation? Here's the thing that a lot of casual fans might not realize when they first hear about this incident, when they first see the clip and think it's just one moment where things got physical. This wasn't some isolated incident where Dijonai Carrington made one bad decision in a moment of poor judgment. This wasn't a player who's generally known for clean play and fundamental defense, who just had one lapse in judgment on this particular night. This is someone with a well-documented history of physical, aggressive play that consistently crosses the line from competitive basketball to dirty, unnecessary contact. And understanding that history, that pattern of behavior, is absolutely crucial to understanding why this moment felt like it was coming all along. Let's go back through the season and look at what we've seen. Earlier this year, there was another incident involving Carrington and Caitlin Clark, who is arguably the most important player in the entire league right now. Clark is a generational talent, someone whose arrival in the WNBA has single-handedly revitalized the league's viewership, relevance, and mainstream attention. She's brought millions of fans to the sport who had never watched women's basketball before. But with that spotlight, with that level of attention, has come something darker. There's been attention from players around the league who seem to resent Clark's success, who seem to view her presence as threatening, who seem determined to send messages on the court. And Carrington has been involved in some of those moments. In one specific incident that people still talk about, she scratched Clark's eye during a game. Not a light scratch that happened during a scramble for the ball or in the chaos of a contested play. A real, visible eye-gouging incident that left marks on Clark's face. Clark's eye was visibly affected. She had to take time to recover from it. The scratches were visible, and it wasn't something that happened accidentally in the flow of the game. It was a deliberate action taken by someone who clearly made a choice to take a shot at Clark in a way that went beyond what the rules allow. But that's not where Carrington's problematic history ends, not even close. She's got a pattern that extends throughout this season and beyond. There was another incident where she pulled a player's hair. Not a slight tug that happened in the chaos of a scramble or when two players were fighting for position. An actual, deliberate hair-pulling incident that stood out enough that people noticed it immediately and remembered it vividly. Then there's the chase-down fouls. Multiple times this season, we've seen her come from behind, targeting players with her forearms and hands, trying to swat them away or take them out while they're going up for shots. Some of these fouls have resulted in fights. Some have resulted in heated confrontations and ejections. Some have just resulted in shaken players, wondering what the hell just happened to them. What makes all of this significant, what makes it impossible to ignore, is that it shows a clear pattern of behavior. This isn't random. This isn't one moment that got caught on camera and blown out of proportion. This is a player who has repeatedly, consistently shown a willingness to play physical in ways that go beyond what the rules allow. She's scratched. She's pulled hair. She's come from behind with forearms and closed fists. She's targeted players who are vulnerable in the air and unable to protect themselves. And she's done it multiple times throughout the season, creating a pattern that everyone in the league is aware of. So when Carrington meets Cunningham on that fast break, when Cunningham is going up for that layup, when she extends her arm and makes that contact, there's context there that matters. This isn't the first time Carrington's made a play like this. This isn't a one-time thing where a normally clean player lost her cool. This is just the moment that happened to get reviewed and upgraded to a flagrant 2 because it was so clearly excessive that there was no way the officials could ignore it. The wind-up was too obvious. The impact was too brutal. The follow-through was too extended. There was no way the officials could look at it and say anything other than, "That's a flagrant 2." And that's actually the point that everyone seems to miss or ignore in all of the discussion and debate that followed. If Carrington had made that exact same play, but caught only the edge of Cunningham's arm, if she'd made some kind of contact with the ball to at least make it look like she was defending the shot, if she'd pulled back at the last second and made it look less deliberate and more incidental, the officials might have just called it a flagrant 1. Flagrant 1 means you stay in the game. Flagrant 1 means you can continue playing and maybe be more careful going forward. But she didn't do any of those things. She went full force, full contact, straight across the face and neck with no attempt to play the ball or defend the shot in a legitimate way. And that's exactly why the automatic ejection happened. The documented history of dirty play matters because it shows this wasn't an accident or a mistake. When you've scratched someone's eye before, when you've pulled hair before, when you've come from behind with forearms multiple times throughout a season, and then you do it again in a nationally televised game and catch someone across the face hard enough to draw blood, you don't get to act surprised when you're ejected. You don't get to act like this is some shocking turn of events that came out of nowhere. You don't get to immediately run to social media and start posting inflammatory language about why you got thrown out. Because everyone watching the tape, everyone who's been following the league all season, everyone who knows what Carrington has done before, they all know that this is consistent with who you are as a player. They know this is part of a pattern. They know you should have known better. The WNBA has a responsibility to protect its players from this kind of physical abuse. The officials have a responsibility to enforce the rules consistently and fairly. And they did that. They called a flagrant 2 because Carrington committed a flagrant 2, a violation that checked every single box on the checklist. Not because of who threw it, not because of who received it, but because of what the rules actually say about excessive contact, vulnerable players, and plays that can result in injury. Let's break down what actually matters in this entire situation, because there's been so much noise surrounding the white privilege, posts that people have lost sight of the fundamental truth that sits at the center of everything. This was a basketball rule being applied exactly the way it's supposed to be applied, with no regard for anything except whether a player broke the rules or didn't. The rule doesn't care about identity. The rule doesn't care about politics. The rule doesn't care about anything except whether the specific action that occurred violated the specific criteria laid out in the rule book. A flagrant 2 in the WNBA isn't some subjective call where referees have a ton of wiggle room or where personal judgment plays a huge role. There's an actual, specific checklist that's been established by the league office. Does the player wind up before contact is made? Yes. Carrington extended her arm deliberately and brought it forward with force and intention. Is there excessive contact that goes beyond what's needed to defend the shot? Absolutely. Cunningham wasn't even threatening to score anymore by the time full contact was made. She was already committed to her layup, and Carrington's arm was just across her face with no attempt to play the ball. Is the follow-through extended beyond what would be necessary? Yes. The arm didn't stop at first contact. It followed through across Cunningham's face and neck in a way that suggested intent to make an impact. Is the receiving player in a vulnerable position where they can't protect themselves? Completely. Cunningham was in the air, committed to her shot, unable to protect herself or get away from the incoming contact that was coming from behind her field of vision. This play checked every single box on the flagrant 2 checklist. Everyone, all of them. When a play checks every box, when every single element of the flagrant 2 definition is present, the officials don't have discretion. They don't get to sit around and have a debate about whether it was really that bad or whether it was just hard-nosed physical defense that crossed the line slightly. The rules are the rules. The guidelines are clear. The call gets made. It's mandatory. It's not optional. Here's what Emmanuel Cho, who is one of the most respected analysts in sports media and who really knows his stuff when it comes to breaking down the nuances of sports, said when he broke this whole situation down on his show. He pointed out something fundamental that people seem to be missing. Fouls like this happen constantly across every possible combination of players in the league. White on white, black on black, white on black, black on white. Hard fouls, physical fouls, contact fouls, fouls that test the very edges of what's allowed under the rules. And you know what? Most of the time, none of those fouls, regardless of who commits them or who receives them, get labeled with language as heavy and inflammatory as white privilege. They get called fouls. They get reviewed if they're egregious enough. They get upgraded to flagrant 1s or flagrant 2s based purely on the rules. And then everyone moves on with the game. But in this specific situation, Carrington made a flagrant 2. It was reviewed. It was upgraded from whatever initial call was made. It was an automatic ejection. Standard process. Standard outcome. Everything went exactly according to protocol. And then instead of accepting that she'd broken the rules and been punished for it, instead of moving on with the game and maybe thinking about what she could do better, Instead of taking her ejection like countless other players have done before her and will do after her, she posted white privilege within minutes to the exact team of the player she just fouled. With no other context or explanation or follow-up, just 2 words and a team tag. Cho made the point that you can't just throw out a word that heavy, a phrase that carries so much historical and social weight, and then expect people not to connect the dots immediately. He said something that really resonated with how people thought about this. America is a speaker-oriented country, which means the burden is on the person speaking to be clear and direct. If Carrington meant something different, if she was talking about something other than the ejection, she should have been absolutely clear about that from the very beginning. She shouldn't have left 2 loaded words hanging out there for millions of people to interpret in real time on social media. She shouldn't have tagged the specific team. She shouldn't have posted it within seconds of leaving the court. The reason Cho's breakdown lands so hard with people is that he's not saying Carrington is a bad person. He's not attacking her character. He's not saying she's a dirty player in general, though the tape certainly suggests that. But he's specifically saying that this particular call, this particular ejection, wasn't about race. It was about rules. Rules that have been in place for years in professional basketball. Rules that apply to every player equally. Rules that don't make exceptions or provide special treatment based on skin color or political beliefs or where someone comes from. Think about what the officials were essentially saying when they confirmed that Cunningham's reaction was justified and wouldn't be penalized. They were saying, this foul was bad. This foul was excessive. This foul was outside the boundaries of what the rules allow. And the player who received it had every reason to be upset about it. Those officials didn't care about Carrington's background. They didn't care about her upbringing or her circumstances. They didn't care about Cunningham's background either. They cared about whether the play violated the rules. And it did, unambiguously, undeniably, without any question whatsoever. The thing that makes this so frustrating for people who watched it unfold in real time is that the rules did exactly what they're supposed to do. The review process worked perfectly. The officials made the correct call. The flagrant 2 was justified by every single metric. And there's literally no way to look at that specific foul and say it was called differently because of race, because of politics, because of anything except the play itself. You'd have to be willing to ignore everything that happened on the court, ignore the blood that was drawn, ignore the vulnerable position, ignore the contact with the head and neck area, and convince yourself that somehow the rules don't apply the same to everyone. But that's not how professional basketball works. That's not how any sport works. So here's where it gets really interesting, where the narrative starts to fall apart under scrutiny. After Carrington posted white privilege, and the entire internet immediately and unanimously connected it to the ejection she'd just received, after analysts started breaking down why the call was correct and had absolutely nothing to do with race or discrimination, after the backlash started rolling in from basically every direction, Carrington decided she needed to clarify what she meant. Because apparently, everyone had misunderstood her. Everyone had jumped to conclusions. Everyone had assumed something that she never actually said, or so she claimed. Her response was detailed and pointed directly at the people criticizing her. She went on social media and said, "I've never once claimed that the assessment of the foul was white privilege. That was your assumption. Try exercising your critical thinking skills. I know you studied psych." She was directly calling out Emmanuel Cho and his detailed breakdown. She was saying that he'd made an assumption, that he'd jumped to a conclusion that she didn't actually make. She was telling him to think more critically about what she'd written. She was suggesting that his analysis was surface level and that he was missing something deeper. And then she added even more context and justification to her position. She said she went to one of the top universities in the country. She studied this subject specifically in an academic setting. She educated herself on the historical and social weight of the term white privilege. She took classes on race and privilege and systemic issues. And because of that education, because of that background, she would never use the term as a weapon or a throwaway phrase without proper evidence and substantiation backing it up. Think about what she's arguing here. She's arguing that when she posted white privilege directly underneath a video of her getting ejected for fouling a white player, when she tagged that player's team in the post, when she did all of this within minutes of leaving the court while emotions were still running high, she was not making a statement about the foul. She was making some other statement, about something else entirely, at that exact moment. But she just didn't feel like explaining what that something else was. She didn't feel like clarifying in any way. She just felt like criticizing people for not understanding what she meant. The problem with this walkback, the fundamental issue with this explanation, is that it doesn't actually solve anything. It doesn't clarify. It just creates more questions and more confusion. If the post wasn't about the foul, what was it about? What was she referring to? She had the perfect opportunity in that moment, when she was clarifying her position to the entire internet, when she was defending herself against the backlash, when she was explaining her position. She had the chance to say what she actually meant. But instead, she just said that people misunderstood her and that she was educated enough to know the weight of the words she was using, which actually proves the opposite point. It proves that she knew exactly what she was doing. It proves that she used those words intentionally. This is actually what Cho pointed out in his response to her clarification. He basically said, "Fine, if you say the two things weren't connected, I'll stand corrected and I'll acknowledge that I might have misunderstood." But he added the crucial part that really hit home. America is a speaker-oriented country. It is on you, the speaker, to be clear, to be direct, and to be obvious with what you are speaking about. It is not on the receiver, the reader, or the listener. In other words, Carrington can't post inflammatory language right after a controversial moment and then get upset when people interpret it in the obvious way. That's not people jumping to conclusions unfairly. That's people reading exactly what was right in front of them. That's people using basic logic to connect the dots. And here's the thing that really exposes the inconsistency in her entire position. She's saying she has a deep, academic understanding of white privilege. She's saying she wouldn't use the term lightly or as a rhetorical weapon. She's saying she's educated on the subject matter and knows the historical and social weight the phrase carries. But then she posts two words with zero context whatsoever and expects people to believe it wasn't about the thing that just happened. That's not how communication works. If you're going to use a loaded term, if you're going to throw out language that heavy, that carries so much baggage and history, you have to do the work to explain it. You have to provide context. You have to give people something to work with, especially if you're doing it on social media where millions of people are going to see it and interpret it instantly without the benefit of conversation or clarification. The timing absolutely matters, and there's no way around it. Carrington didn't post white privilege 3 hours after the game ended, after she'd had time to think about something broader or more systemic or more institutional. She posted it within minutes of leaving the court, within minutes of the ejection being confirmed, within minutes of the review being completed. If it wasn't about the foul, why post it then? Why not wait until later? Why not take time to compose a fuller statement that actually explains what you mean? Why not give people context? The urgency and the timing tell their own story. And then there's the team tag. She didn't just post white privilege to her general followers or to a broader audience. She directly tagged the Indiana Fever, the team of the player she'd just fouled. If she was making some broader point about institutional racism in professional sports or systemic inequality in the WNBA as a whole, why tag that specific team? Why not tag the league office? Why not tag a broader conversation happening in sports or in society? Why be so specific? The specificity of the tag makes the connection crystal clear. She was talking about the foul. She was talking about the ejection. She was talking about what had just happened. What's particularly frustrating about the walkback is that it treats the audience like they're stupid, like they weren't watching the same sequence of events, like they didn't see the ejection and see the post and understand the connection. But everyone watching understood perfectly. That's why the reaction was so immediate and so negative. It wasn't because people misunderstood. It was because they understood exactly what she was implying. Now here's where this story takes a really dark, concerning turn that reveals something deeper about what's happening inside the WNBA right now. Because the foul itself, the ejection, the controversial post that followed, the walkback and the defenses, those are all significant moments in this saga. But what happened after all of that, The reactions from other players and coaches around the league, the way different people in positions of influence responded. That's where you start to understand what's really going on inside the locker rooms and in the culture of professional women's basketball. And honestly, it's not a pretty picture. Sydney Cowlson, who actually played alongside Sophie Cunningham on the Indiana Fever just last season, watched that foul happen. She saw it unfold in real time. She witnessed her former teammate get hit across the face hard enough to draw blood. She saw the contact. She saw the impact. She saw Cunningham's reaction. And instead of expressing concern for her well-being, instead of showing sympathy for someone she'd shared a locker room with, instead of even just staying quiet and letting the moment pass, she posted her own reaction publicly on social media. She said she loved it. She celebrated that Cunningham had been taken out by Carrington. She was basically cheering for a player to get hurt. Think about what that means. This is a player who was in the locker room with Cunningham, who shared a team with her, who practiced alongside her, who benefited directly from being on a roster with one of the best players in the entire league, who got exposure and opportunities because of Cunningham's presence. And instead of any kind of loyalty or concern, instead of any kind of professional courtesy or human decency, she's cheering when Cunningham gets clobbered on the court. She's celebrating an injury. She's publicly rooting against someone she used to call a teammate. That tells you everything you need to know about the divisions that have formed around the Cunningham and Clark situation. This isn't just outside noise from rival fans or from people on social media who don't understand the game. This is coming from inside the league, from players who used to be teammates with Cunningham, from people who should theoretically understand what it's like to be in Cunningham's position, from people who benefited from her being there. And instead of that understanding, instead of that loyalty, you get celebration of someone getting hurt. But it's not just former teammates showing their true colors. It's also coaching staff. Stephanie White is the head coach of the Indiana Fever. She's Sophie Cunningham's coach. Cunningham plays for her every single night. They have a professional relationship that extends beyond just games. They interact in practice, in team meetings, in the locker room environment. When one of your players gets hit across the face hard enough to draw blood, when one of your players is on the receiving end of a flagrant 2, the natural reaction from a coach is to defend your player, to go on record saying that it was excessive, to protect your own and send a message that your locker room sticks together. Except Stephanie White didn't do that, not even close. When reporters asked her about the incident after the game, when they wanted her to comment on what happened to her own player, she said she didn't think Carrington intentionally went for the neck, but that she had no problem with the hard foul itself. She said Carrington was just competing. She said nobody should expect an easy layup against her. She was basically defending the person who fouled her player. She was making excuses for them. She was normalizing the hit by saying that's just how Carrington plays, and that's just how you have to play defense in the WNBA. Think about that. Your own player just got hit in the face. She's standing right there, probably still feeling the impact of that forearm across her neck and face. She's probably bleeding. She's probably shaken. And your response as her coach is to defend the person who hit her, to make excuses for them, to normalize hitting players in the face, to say that's just part of the game. That's a strange thing to hear from a coach. That's the kind of response that says more about the state of the locker room than it does about the foul itself. Because what Stephanie White is essentially saying is that hitting players in the face is fine as long as it's part of your competitive nature. Which means Sophie Cunningham, a player on her roster, is fair game for that kind of treatment. Which means the message being sent to other players is that it's okay to take shots at Cunningham because the coach isn't going to defend her. Which means Cunningham is essentially isolated, without support from the person who's supposed to have her back the most. And that's the real issue here. That's the culture problem that goes way beyond this one play. Because Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark are responsible for the explosion in WNBA viewership and mainstream attention. Networks are scheduling games around them. Arenas that used to be half empty are selling out. Sponsors are investing in the league. TV deals are getting bigger and bigger. Paychecks are going up across the entire league because these two players have brought mainstream attention to women's basketball. Think about that for a second. the two players responsible for generating the financial windfall that's benefiting every single player in this league, the two players who are making the WNBA relevant and important, are the same two players that some of those benefiting players seem to resent the most. Carlson benefited from being on the Fever roster with Cunningham. She got opportunities because of that. She got exposure on national television. She got endorsement opportunities. She got a bigger paycheck because the team was getting more attention and more media coverage. And her response to Cunningham getting hurt is to celebrate it publicly. To really understand what's happening with this whole situation, to get to the core of why Sophie Cunningham has become such a polarizing figure in the WNBA, and why this foul became so controversial, you have to zoom out and look at the broader context of what Cunningham represents and why she's become a target. And it all comes down to one thing that she said publicly, one statement that she made that has made her a lightning rod for criticism and hostility throughout the league. Sophie Cunningham went on record, in interviews and on social media, saying that only biological women should be allowed to play in the WNBA. That's the core of her statement. That's what sparked everything. She made a comment about women's sports and biological sex, and that statement has made her a target within the league. She's been called every name in the book: transphobic, anti-trans, bigoted, discriminatory, hateful. Every insult you can imagine has been thrown at her, not just from casual fans on social media, but from people inside the league. From coaches, from analysts, from other players, from people in positions of influence. She's basically made herself a pariah in the eyes of a significant portion of the WNBA by taking a stance on a controversial topic. Now, whether you agree with her stance or not, whether you think what she said was right or wrong, whether you believe she was expressing a legitimate perspective or an offensive one, that's not necessarily relevant to this particular story. The point is that she took a position. She was willing to be controversial. She was willing to potentially alienate people. She was willing to say something that she knew would be divisive. And that willingness to speak up, that decision to not stay silent, has come with real consequences. She's been targeted on the court. She's been subject to hard fouls that cross the line from physical defense to dirty play. She's been cheered against by her own former teammates. She's been soft defended by her own coach when she got hurt. She's been made to feel isolated within her own team and her own league. And through it all, she's had to keep playing, keep competing, keep showing up night after night. What makes it worse is that Cunningham didn't stop after making that initial statement and then moving on. She spent this entire season being one of the most outspoken defenders of Caitlin Clark. She's gone on record multiple times calling out the physical treatment that Clark receives every single night on the court. She's examined specific plays. She's named specific players who she believes are targeting Clark. She's gone on television and said publicly that some teams have talked in their own locker rooms about wanting to send a message to Clark, about wanting to show her what the WNBA really is. She's basically positioned herself as one of the very few players in the league willing to say out loud what everyone can see happening on the court, but what most players are too afraid to address. That kind of advocacy doesn't make you popular. That kind of truth-telling doesn't win you allies around the league. When you're calling out other players for targeting someone, when you're suggesting that there's a coordinated effort to physically punish certain players, when you're essentially accusing other teams and other players of unsportsmanlike and possibly dirty conduct, you're creating enemies. And those enemies have long memories. They see you on the court, and they remember what you said. They remember that you called them out. They remember that you weren't willing to just go along with the program and stay silent like everyone else. They remember that you were willing to risk your reputation and your relationships to speak the truth as you saw it. So when Dijonai Carrington fouls Cunningham, when the foul is excessive enough to warrant a flagrant 2 and an automatic ejection, when everything happens in real time in front of thousands of fans, there's context there that extends far beyond the play itself. Not for the foul itself. The foul was what it was, a clear rule violation, but for the reaction from around the league, for Carlson celebrating, for White defending Carrington instead of her own player, for players around the league seemingly satisfied that Cunningham got taken out. They're seeing what they wanted to see. They're seeing someone who's been critical of them, and their teammates finally get what they perceive as justice. They're seeing someone who's been outspoken getting brought down a peg. Here's what's really telling, though, what really exposes the falseness of Carrington's claim about white privilege. In an 80% Black, almost 90% LGBTQ league, the idea that Sophie Cunningham, a white, straight woman, is somehow benefiting from white privilege is laughable. She's the minority in that locker room. She's the outsider in that environment. She's the one whose values don't align with the majority of the people around her. She's the one making unpopular statements in an environment where most people don't want to hear what she has to say. Yet she and Caitlin Clark, the other white player who's also been a controversial figure, are the ones driving the financial engine of the entire organization. They're the ones bringing in the money. They're the ones making people care about the WNBA. They're the ones generating the viewership and the sponsorships and the TV deals. And instead of gratitude from the rest of the league, they're getting resentment. Legendary broadcaster Dick Vitale said something months ago that's aged in a really telling way once this Carrington situation broke. When Caitlin Clark was voted only the 9th best guard in a league-wide player poll, Vitale called it absolutely pure jealousy, and predicted that players around the league would eventually realize just how much Clark had done for all of them financially. He was essentially calling out the petty resentment that seemed to be driving some of the reactions to Clark's arrival and success. And that same resentment, that same jealousy, seems to be alive and well in how some players are treating both Clark and Cunningham. Cunningham has become a symbol of something that makes a lot of people in the WNBA deeply uncomfortable. She's someone willing to speak her mind without fear of consequences. Someone willing to defend traditional values in an environment that doesn't necessarily share those values. Someone willing to protect a teammate who's also become controversial and polarizing. Someone willing to stand up and be counted. And because of that willingness, she's become a target. The foul from Carrington was excessive and rule-breaking and dangerous. But the celebration of it from her former teammates, the soft defense of it from her own coach, the immediate resort to racial language in response to it, that's all part of a larger pattern of resentment and division that's been building all season long. Here's what this entire saga really comes down to when you strip away all the noise, all the controversy, all the back-and-forth arguments. Dijonai Carrington committed a flagrant 2 foul. The officials called it correctly based on the rules of basketball. The rules were applied exactly as they should have been applied. But instead of accepting responsibility, instead of taking the ejection and moving on, Carrington posted "white privilege" immediately after leaving the court. That post wasn't misunderstood. It wasn't taken out of context. It was exactly what it looked like, a suggestion that her ejection was based on race rather than rule enforcement. And then the league's response revealed something far darker about where women's basketball actually stands right now. Instead of unity around the integrity of the game, you saw division. You saw celebration of a player getting hurt from her former teammate. You saw a coach soft defending the aggressor instead of protecting her own player. You saw the very players benefiting from Sophie Cunningham's presence actively rooting against her. The real problem isn't the foul, it's the culture. The WNBA is caught between celebrating its biggest boom ever and actively suppressing the players responsible for that boom. Carrington started this race conversation, not the critics. And until the league decides to actually protect its players equally and hold everyone accountable consistently, these moments will keep happening. The question now is whether the WNBA will finally address what's really going on, or if it will continue down this path of resentment and division.